Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Meher Sher and these are the headlines. U.S. President Joe Biden has ordered an in-depth investigation into alleged Russian interference in the 2020 election. He also directed for probes into the large-scale cyber attack on the U.S. government agencies and Moscow's alleged poisoning of opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Washington has indicated willingness to extend the New START treaty with Moscow by 5 years. U.S. President Joe Biden has unveiled a wartime strategy to combat COVID-19 as the country's death toll from the virus approaches 410,000. Mexico has reported a record of over 1,800 single-day deaths as its tally exceeded 144,000. Meanwhile, Pakistan has registered over 1,700 cases and 47 new deaths, taking the toll to over 11,000. Globally, the virus has claimed 2,088,000 lives and infected nearly 97.5 million. In India, farm leaders are meeting the center for the 11th round of talks over laws that triggered the protest at Delhi borders. Earlier, the farmers rejected the government's proposal to suspend the reforms for 18 months. ISIS has claimed responsibility for twin suicide attacks in Iraq's capital city of Baghdad. At least 32 people were killed and over 100 wounded in the blasts at a crowded market in Tehran Square. And in the English Premier League, champions Liverpool have suffered a shock 1-0 defeat to lowly Burnley, ending their 68-match unbeaten home record. An 83rd-minute penalty from Ashley Barnes decided the contest after he was brought down by goalkeeper Alisson Becker. Well, those were the headlines. More news in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. And now for the news in more detail. We begin in the United States, where President Joe Biden has ordered an in-depth investigation into alleged Russian interference in the 2020 election. In a White House briefing, Press Secretary Jen Psaki said Biden also directed for a probe into the cyber attack on U.S. government agencies. He also called for investigating Moscow's use of chemical weapons against opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Psaki said Biden has tasked the intelligence community with assessing alleged Russian bounties on U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan. She said the U.S. administration is working to hold Russia to account for its reckless and adversarial actions. But Washington has indicated willingness to extend the New START treaty with Russia by 5 years. Psaki said Biden believes that the treaty is in line with U.S. national security interests. Now, U.S. President Joe Biden has unveiled a wartime strategy to combat COVID-19 as the country's death toll from the virus approaches 410,000. Mexico has reported a record of over 1,800 single-day deaths as its tally exceeds 144,000. Globally, the virus has claimed 2,088,000 lives and infected nearly 97.5 million. More in this report.
The world is once again drawing the curtain on normalcy as record surge of COVID-19 forces fresh restrictions. Brazil has cancelled the Rio Carnival due to the second wave of the outbreak, which has gathered steam with scarce vaccine supplies. ICUs in the 3 biggest cities of Colombia have run out of capacity. Meanwhile, the closure of vaccine hubs and postponement of appointments have left New Yorkers in a state of frustration. The city's mayor has asked the federal government to allow the use of reserved second doses as first doses as the vaccines run out. Meanwhile, President Joe Biden has announced a 10-step plan that includes expanding testing, vaccinations, and increasing mask wearing.
Let me be very clear. Things are going to continue to get worse before they get better. The memorial we held 2 nights ago will not be our last one, unfortunately. The death toll will likely top 500,000 next month. The cases will continue to mount. We didn't get into this mess overnight, and it's going to take months for us to turn things around. But let me be equally clear. We will get through this.
In Europe, the frustration over Pfizer's unexpected cut in supplies grows as the US drug maker halved the volume of vaccines for some countries. Meanwhile, Portugal has suspended all flights to and from Britain as it scrambles to tackle the rapid spread of the new variant. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has raised fears that tough COVID-19 restrictions will continue well into the spring and maybe even beyond. Over in the EU, Brussels says it will mark COVID-19 hotspots as dark red to implement harsher restrictions on such zones.
So we propose that the newly introduced category of dark red, a dark red zone, would show that in this zone the virus is circulating at a very high level. Persons traveling from dark red areas could be required to do a test before departure, as well as to undergo quarantine after arrival.
In Asia, Beijing has launched mass COVID-19 testing in parts of the city as China battles the worst outbreak since March 2020. Meanwhile, South Korea's struggle to contain the virus continues, with new cases dipping under 400.
Whereas Pakistan has recorded another 47 deaths from COVID-19 overnight, this pushes the toll to 11,204. Health officials say 1,745 infections were detected in the last 24 hours. The tally of cases has risen to over 528,000. While more than 482,000 people have recovered. There are more than 34,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country. Meanwhile, 2 more vaccine manufacturers have contacted Pakistan's drug authority. The health ministry says Russia's Gamaleya Institute applied for emergency use of its Sputnik V vaccine in Pakistan, and another Chinese firm, Longcom Biopharmaceuticals, has applied for phase 3 clinical trials. Moving on, in India, farm leaders are meeting the center for the 11th round of talks over laws that triggered the protest at Delhi borders. Earlier, the farmers rejected the center's proposal to suspend the reforms for 18 months. Congress leader Sonia Gandhi said the government has shown insensitivity and arrogance in the consultations. The farmers have reiterated that they will not end the protest until the government repeals the laws. They have pledged to go ahead with their rally planned for Republic Day. Earlier, the unions paid homage to 143 farmers who died during the movement so far. Also in India, opposition parties have called for a probe into the leaked WhatsApp chats of controversial TV anchor Arnab Goswami. Shashi Tharoor, a leading Congress lawmaker, said the messages required a serious inquiry by the Modi government. Tharoor said the ultra-nationalist anchor celebrated the deaths of 40 soldiers and said, "We won like crazy." He slammed the fraudulent manipulation of television rating points and the leaking of military secrets for commercial benefit. Meanwhile, Shiv Sena has also asked the Bharatiya Janata Party government to take action against the Republic TV anchor. Now, the United Nations has adopted a resolution on the protection of religious sites by consensus. It was sponsored by Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, among other Organization of Islamic Cooperation countries. The resolution condemns all acts of violence against religious sites across the world, especially in India. In his tweet, Pakistan's envoy Munir Akram said Islamabad will continue to denounce attacks on religious sites. Meanwhile, Pakistan has rejected India's unwarranted assertions about the Hindu temple incident in Karak at the UN General Assembly. Pakistan's delegate Zulkarnain China said Delhi should set its own house in order before feigning concern for minority rights elsewhere. Moving on, Pakistan has called on U.S. President Joe Biden to follow up on the ongoing Aflan peace process and the withdrawal of troops. In an interview, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Pakistan hopes for greater engagement with the new government. Qureshi said that the Biden administration should persevere with the progress and not reverse things. He said Pakistan has facilitated the talks, but ultimately the responsibility lies with the Afghan leadership. The foreign minister blamed internal and external spoilers for the recent surge in violence and said that they benefit from the war economy. Moving on, the Taliban say Beijing has expressed hope to strengthen economic ties with Afghanistan after the country achieves peace and stability. In a series of tweets, a Taliban spokesperson said their leaders met the Chinese ambassador to Qatar, Zhao Jian, in Doha. Mohammed Naeem said that Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar-led delegation discussed intra-Afghan talks and implementation of the Doha Pact. Baradar requested Zhao to aid Afghans in vaccinating and containing COVID-19. He said the Chinese ambassador reaffirmed full support of Beijing to the process of the intra-Afghan negotiations. Now in Iraq, the Prime Minister has vowed an earth-shattering response to ISIS bombings in the capital city of Baghdad. ISIS earlier claimed responsibility for twin suicide attacks at a crowded market, which killed at least 32 people. In a tweet, Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi said the evil leaders of ISIS will face a force to be reckoned with. He said the Iraqi people have proven resolve in the face of ISIS and terrorism, and their will to live is a message of unparalleled courage. Earlier, al-Kadhimi sacked key security and police commanders after an urgent meeting. Meanwhile, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has urged Iraqis to reject any attempts to spread fear and violence. Moving on to Syria, at least 4 people have been killed in Israeli airstrikes in the western central governorate of Hama. Syrian state media said those killed include 2 women and 2 children from the same family. It said Syrian air defenses intercepted most of the projectiles. However, 3 houses were destroyed in the strike. Damascus said the missiles were launched from over the Lebanese city of Tripoli. Earlier, an Israeli air raid in southeast Syria killed dozens of soldiers. The United Nations has expressed serious concern over the deteriorating security condition at a refugee camp in northeast Syria. In a statement, the UN said it received reports of 12 murders of Syrian and Iraqi camp residents in some 2 weeks. The UN said children and women make up for more than 80% of the El Hol camp's population. It said the rise in violence jeopardizes the ability of the UN and humanitarian partners to deliver aid. Syria's biggest camp for the displaced hosts around 62,000 refugees and is held by Kurdish forces. The United Arab Emirates has voiced support for Morocco's recent claim of autonomy over the Sahara region. This comes after UAE Foreign Minister Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan met Morocco's King Mohammed VI in Rabat. Zayed Al Nahyan said UAE and Morocco are willing to cooperate in all fields to achieve common interests. He also met his Moroccan counterpart Nasser Bourita. In a statement, UAE's foreign ministry said the 2 leaders discussed bilateral ties and regional and international issues of common interest. In India, at least 8 people have been killed following a blast in a truckload of explosives in southwestern Karnataka state. Police say the truck was parked at a railway quarry site in Shivamogga district. They said the truck was transporting gelatin sticks in the area that has nearly 100 quarrying sites. Officials warn there is a possibility of subsequent explosions since some dynamite sticks are still active. They added that they have sealed the area and called the bomb disposal squads. The state's chief minister has ordered an inquiry into the incident. And we'll be back with more news in detail after a short break. Stay with us. We're back. In the U.S., Republican senators are asking the Democrats to delay the start of former President Donald Trump's impeachment trial until February. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said Trump deserves a full and fair process in line with his rights. In a statement, McConnell said he has sent his proposal to Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer. McConnell says the House of Representatives should send the impeachment charge to the Senate on January 28th. He said Trump should be given 2 weeks after that to prepare his pre-trial brief before the Senate trial begins. Meanwhile, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said her chamber is ready to send an article of impeachment to the Senate. The lower house impeached Trump for a second time on January 13th for inciting insurrection. Moving on, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has welcomed the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The pact is the first multilateral nuclear disarmament accord in more than 2 decades. In a video message, Guterres hailed the pact as an important step towards the goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. He also called on all countries to work together to realize this vision for common security and collective safety. The pact came into force today after ratification by 50 states, including Austria, Ireland, New Zealand, and South Africa. However, no major nuclear power has signed or ratified the treaty so far. Now, the European Court of Human Rights says Russia is responsible for the ill treatment of civilians in the 2008 Georgian war. The Strasbourg-based court ruled Moscow can be held accountable for at least 3 episodes after the fighting was largely over. The ruling declared Russia-backed forces detained 160 people, mostly ethnic Georgian women and elderly, in a basement in indecent conditions. It further said more than 30 Georgian prisoners of war were subjected to torture.
Operative point number 3. Holds by 16 votes to 1 that there was an administrative practice contrary to Articles 2, 3, and 8 of the Convention and Article 1 of Protocol number 1 as regards the killing of civilians and the torching and looting of houses in Georgian villages in South Ossetia and in the buffer zone, and dismisses the preliminary objection of non-exhaustion of domestic remedies raised by the respondent government in that regard.
Russian representatives at the court said the Georgian allegations were false and took place outside Russia's jurisdiction. And now moving on, the Central African Republic has declared a 15-day state of emergency amid attempts by rebels to blockade the capital, Bangui. This follows a surge in attacks by armed groups seeking to overturn the December 27th presidential election. A presidential spokesperson said the state of emergency will allow authorities to make arrests without going through national prosecutors. In light of the rising violence, the UN envoy to the country urged the Security Council to deploy more peacekeepers. On January 13th, the rebels launched 2 simultaneous attacks on Bangui, which were rebuffed by the UN mission. The country's constitutional court declared President Faustin Archange Touadéra the winner on Monday. Now in Canada, Governor-General Julie Payet has resigned amid allegations of workplace harassment. Payet resigned just hours after officials received the results of an independent probe into reports of verbal abuse and bullying by her. In a statement, Payet said no formal complaints or official grievances were made during her tenure. But Payet added she took the allegations seriously. In his statement, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said he had received her resignation. He said every employee in the Government of Canada has the right to work in a safe and healthy environment. The Canadian government says Chief Justice of the Supreme Court Richard Wagner will temporarily fill the position. Moving on, Google has threatened to remove its search engine from Australia if it is forced to share royalties with news publishers. Canberra is introducing a landmark law to make Google and Facebook pay media outlets for their news content. Google Australia Managing Director Mel Silva told a Senate hearing that the laws were unworkable. This drew a sharp response from Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Morrison said his government remained committed to progressing the laws through Parliament this year. He asserted that Australia makes the rules for things you can do in Australia and lawmakers will not yield to threats. Now, sick of sexist playing cards, a Dutch woman created a genderless pack. She has replaced the king, queen, and jack with genderless symbols. Find out more in this report.
Indy Melink, a Dutch card fan, was explaining a game to her cousins last summer when she asked herself, why should a king be worth more than a queen? The 23-year-old psychology student, encouraged by her father, decided it was time to break the centuries-old tradition of sexual inequality in playing card decks that rank men above women.
I would hope to raise awareness about subtle inequalities as well, like inequalities in card games like this and how that does still influence people in their daily lives as well.
After a lot of trial and error, she designed a genderless deck in which the images of a king, queen, and jack were replaced with gold, silver, and bronze. Friends and family snapped up the first 50 decks of the GSB cards, which have images of gold bars, silver coins, and bronze shields. But 70 kilometers away, members of the Dutch Bridge Association were split about Melink's creations. But fortunately for Melink, online sales of her cards have boomed. Within a few months, she has mailed off around 1,500 packs, including orders from Belgium, Germany, France, and the United States.
In Peru, archaeologists have discovered tombs containing the remains of children thought to have belonged to the Incan societal elite. Experts carried out the excavations in the boundaries of a 500-year-old northern archaeological site. More in this report.
Peru is home to hundreds of ancient archaeological sites. Experts have now discovered tombs at the Huaca de las Abejas complex in the region of Lambayeque. Historians believe the complex, which is made of clay pyramids, formed an administrative and ceremonial center around 1100 AD. They dug up the remains of two children thought to have belonged to the Incan elite. They were able to gain further certainty on the date the children were entombed by studying sedimentation under their tombs.
We have found the burials of two children with the llama. These remains were found under a sedimentation layer which was revealed after it rained. We believe the archaeological remains are approximately 500 years old from the Inca culture.
Archaeologists have so far uncovered the remains of 49 people. They say the remains of a llama were also found nearby, along with ceramic utensils known to be used by the elite. The Incas domesticated the camelid to provide them with meat and wool.
The way these people were buried show they had some level of importance. The remains unearthed belonged to people from a high middle rank. They were people from the Inca elite.
The Incas dominated the southern part of the continent from southern Ecuador and Colombia to central Chile 500 years ago.
On to business. Pakistan has approved several healthcare and development projects worth $1.3 billion. The Executive Committee of the National Economic Council signed off the projects in a meeting. The meeting was chaired by Finance Minister Dr. Abdul Hafiz Sheikh. The projects also aim at infrastructural development and coronavirus interventions for less developed areas. The Council approved over $240 million for the construction of a motorway. Taking to Twitter, Federal Minister for Planning Asad Umar said the funding includes $280 million for new healthcare facilities. He has termed it as the largest healthcare project ever done by a federal government. Now, China has overtaken Germany as the country with the world's largest current account surplus. An IFO Institute for Economic Research report shows China's medical exports boosted during the pandemic. The research states China's current account surplus more than doubled to $310 billion last year. Germany's current account surplus shrank to $261 billion for the fifth year in a row in 2020. Japan is a distant third with a current account surplus of $158 billion. The U.S. remains the country with the world's largest current account deficit of $635 billion in 2020. Moving on, European markets have pulled back as investors monitor prospect for economic recovery and the spread of COVID-19. All sectors and major bourses in the region are in negative territory. The Pan-European Stock 600 dropped marginally in early trade, with autos shedding nearly 2% to lead the losses. London's benchmark FTSE 100 index has opened with a fractional loss. Frankfurt's DAX 30 index and the Paris CAC 40 have dropped just over 0.5% each. Earlier, stocks in the Asia-Pacific also declined over rising coronavirus cases, especially in China. It's now time to take a look at the latest weather updates from around the world. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.